So what advice would I give my 20-something self?
5 things I wish I would have known in my 20s.
5 lessons that I learned during my 20s.
So my 20s were by far the most transformative years of my life.
I'm in the last year of my 20s. I feel like this has been the most formative phase of my life.
Some of the stuff I wish I had known in my 20s.
20 things I learned in my 20s.
There are some things that I wish I had known going into this decade of my life that I did not.
Yesterday, I turned 23 and I cried. I did not like hitting that milestone. So on New Year's, I felt depressed, quite frankly. And the thing about depression is you feel like it's never going to get better. You feel like it's hopeless. A lot of people in the pandemic are experiencing this feeling now. Back in June, we were like, yeah, this is scary, but it's going to be over in a couple weeks, right? Right? And then it wasn't. And then a year passed. And even though, dare I say, all humans experience this kind of thing, we rarely talk about it because we all feel lonely and ashamed and like children. Everyone in our age group is feeling this way, but no one is talking about it. And I think one of the crappiest things about dealing with mental health when you're an adult is that there's no one there to get you out of it. It's hard to go to work whenever you feel hopeless and like life isn't worth living. You know, I've heard a lot of mental health advocates, which, you know, I agree with. I've heard a lot of mental health advocates saying, well, if you break a limb, then you go to the doctors. So if you have a mental illness, then you go see a therapist or a counselor or a psychologist and you get that checked out. If I had a disease like COVID, then I would be told to go home and rest and to take care of myself. And when you have depression, because it's invisible, you can't really, I mean, you can take a day off, you know, it's frowned upon to take a personal day sometimes. There are weird chemicals in your brain that you're not getting, and that's why you feel the way that you do. So it is physical. And because of adulthood in American culture, we have to become independent from our parents. This is great for a number of reasons. It's also very hard for another number of reasons. It's not a judgment saying to ourselves, you know, we have to grow up, we have to learn how to take care of ourselves. It's a fact of life. I am my new parent. I am my new mom. So the reason I'm saying all of this is because we need to give ourselves the permission to recognize that we are in a situation that requires some fierce coping mechanisms. And if you're in your early 20s and you're listening to this and you're like, I hate being in my early 20s. I hate that I just moved out. I hate that I have to go to work every day. Yeah, I hate it too, okay? Another point that I would like to make is coping with quote-unquote irrational fears, which may or may not be applicable in 2021. In a normal context, if I was talking to a friend that came to me with all these anxious issues, and I would just say, well, do you think that's really gonna happen? That might not be the most helpful thing to say, but that might be one of the things that we talk about. Do you really think this is gonna happen? And within a pandemic, that question has not been very helpful. For example, if you're scared that your parents are gonna die, in 2020 and in 2021, we see a lot of deaths on the news, and we see that people over the age of 65 are high risk. That quote-unquote irrational fear isn't irrational, and that's really, really tough. My parents are in that age range. They could die this year. That's a very real possibility, and I think it's a disservice to ourselves to say, no, you're being ridiculous. It's not going to happen to you. It's not going to happen to you. It's not going to happen to you. Because the people that it did happen to probably said, it's not going to happen to me. It's not going to happen to me. And it might. And I think it's healthy to admit that because we need to know that we are not crazy. Our fear is here to protect us. And in many situations, my fear has been overbearing and quite annoying, to be honest. Sure, it's been exhausting, but it's kept me from a lot of danger. And know that crying for hours and hours and stressing and exhausting yourself throughout the day with all these worries, it's not crazy. It is so natural and it is so normal to be doing that. I'm not saying it's healthy, I'm not saying it's pleasant for anyone to deal with, but it is very, very, very normal. Pretty much everyone is reacting similarly, and if you aren't, all the power to you. Please share with me your tips on how you're not freaking out right now. For the past year, people have lost their jobs, they have been locked inside with an abusive spouse or an addiction. I know that a lot of people are talking about gaining tons of weight after this, and if you are one of those people, give yourself a break. You're going through a tough time, and to expect your body to be 100% healthy under really crappy circumstances is unreasonable. Humans are social creatures. I have gone probably an entire year without a hug. Do you know what the recommended hugs rate is? 8 hugs a day.
8 hugs a day.
For a psychologist to say that I need hugs for survival and that I haven't been getting any hugs or any physical touch or even a lot of outside contact, it means that parts of my body are suffering, parts of my psyche are suffering, and if that manifests in eating an extra piece of cake just to distract myself, I'm not going to beat myself up over that. I'm going to realize I'm going through a tough time. It's very important that we thank our fear. Maybe it's not the most helpful thing out there, but we need to give credit to ourselves in saying that this fear that we're experiencing is a call to survival. One of the emotions that I have a really hard time with is my anger. I feel a lot of shame over my anger. I'm angry with how I beat myself up. I'm angry with how people treat me. I'm angry with reality. So let's take a second to make friends with our inner bully. I don't know about you, but whenever I see a bully from an objective standpoint, like in a movie, I cannot help but feel sorry for them.
Why you gotta bother me, man? Because I'm not doing very well at school. I'm reading at a 3rd grade level. I really don't want to get left back. So when I see somebody reading for fun, it makes me feel that much more stupid. And then I get mad.
I didn't know that.
Usually within a movie, you can see the bully's backstory. You can see that he or she had an abusive father or had a really traumatic childhood, and that affected them greatly. Though this doesn't excuse abusive behavior in adulthood, I still think we have to empathize with ourselves. This is very different if you're in an abusive domestic situation. We're not talking about this right now. If you're in that situation, get out. But in this situation, in dealing with our own bullies, and in dealing with, maybe that coworker who makes a snide comment that hurts your feelings. But I think we can all admit that this bullying is just on the surface of a ton of personal issues. It's a very sticky situation because on one hand, we can't enable a bully, and we can't, explain away their behavior and say, oh, it's okay that you treat people like crap. But I think it is okay to acknowledge that the people who bully others are hurting on the inside and that they are in desperate need of help. And we see this in Rescue Dog. And what happens when they first see the dog? The dog snarls and it barks and it bites and it defends itself. And I think we have a real issue with transferring this ideology into human psyche. I think too often we look at ourselves and we speak really harshly. You can't untangle a huge knot by beating at it with a sledgehammer ruthlessly day after day. So if we look at our inner bully's motive, we realize that it's much like fear. It's there to protect us. Whether we like to admit it or not, anger is incredibly powerful, and it's also very, very useful. And because anger is usually provoked when we feel that we are being treated unfairly, we can call this anger our defender. We can thank our anger for trying to do its best, even if it's doing a crap job, man. We can still thank it at the very least for being like, you tried, you attempted. It could have been better, but you attempted. Thank you. Here is a participation award. So now for the fun part. Accountability. Let me just point out, it continues to surprise me when people say, why can't people just take responsibility for their actions? Why do they have to be so immature? Why can't they behave like an adult? It's because behaving like an adult is not fun. It requires a will of steel, a ton of compassion for yourself and others, which we've already stated previously is very, very difficult. But here's the reality. We have 2 options. 1, cycle through ruthless self-hatred until the day we die, or 2, problem solve and grow and change, and it might be unpleasant sometimes. In fact, it will be. Something a lot of people struggle with is the fact that they don't want to be a bad person. And if you've labeled yourself a bad person already in your mind, it's very hard to empathize with that person. Can you imagine trying to empathize with Adolf Hitler, which I'm not sure I would recommend? There would be no use relating or empathizing with a bad person. Within that mindset, they're incapable of change. But if we start seeing human beings for the fluid, nebulous creatures that they are, a hearty cocktail of good and bad traits, we can see that people are redeemable. So we cannot change someone else's actions, but we absolutely can validate, we can empathize, we can have compassion, we can befriend. And what's important to remember is we can also be realistic by doing so. Validating isn't the same as enabling. And many people struggle with empathy because they want justice. Fair enough. They're afraid if they empathize with the quote-unquote bad person, then the bad person will never have the motivation to change. Let's take the US prison system, for example.
The US has the most incarcerated people of any nation on Earth, both by sheer numbers and per capita. As of June 2020, there were 2,121,000 prisoners currently serving time in the US. This number is higher than nations with vastly larger populations, like China and India. It's higher than countries the US considers more authoritarian, like Russia or, again, China. It's even higher than the greatest of all boogeymen, the Soviet Union, at the height of Stalin's power.
And let's compare this prison system, this problem-solving system, to another problem-solving system in Norway, where they have one of the most accommodating prisons, comfortable, humanizing prisons in the world.
Staying in a maximum security prison is not a normal life, but that's also an ambition, to reduce the feeling of being in a prison as much as possible.
It's not for the prison to judge or to punish. We have to interact and be human. I think it's as simple as that.
That's a really important principle in Norway, which talks about that taking someone's liberty away and taking them away from their family, away from their community, that in of itself is the punishment. So life inside prisons should look as normal to life in the community as possible.
And their crime rates are at an all-time low. There's a very good reason for that. And the reason that the situation in the US is so crappy is because of the stigma with mental health that we've created. I think that a lot of people nowadays, whenever they see someone going quote-unquote crazy or spiraling downward, they say, you need to get help, you need to go to rehab, you need to go to some sort of center to heal. Why is that different for prison? Being in the early years of my adulthood, I've just grown up and realized the US is not great. So this, as far as I'm concerned, is undeniable proof that cracking down on someone harshly, including with ourselves, including with our own shortcomings, it's not productive and it doesn't work. And that is one of my key resolutions this year, one out of many, to be more empathetic with myself and with others. So I hope by watching this video, you at least gain some company, even if you don't agree with my point of view, which is fine. I hope that you at least know that you're not alone in feeling the way that you do, in being disappointed at the state of the world. Thank you for listening to my ramblings in a sea of millions.